everyone, and welcome to another live stream brought to you by Women's Health and Wellbeing Services. My name is Melanie Robson. I work here, obviously. I'm a counselling psychologist by trade, by qualifications, and I do a few different things here, including these live streams, let's just say. But my background is in psychology and mental health, and I'm just checking that my microphone's definitely on, because last time I live streamed for 15 minutes before somebody kindly told me that the mic wasn't working, and I had to start again and completely stuffed up that live stream. But such is life, and such is live streaming. And we live stream primarily to get offer the opportunity for people to interact with me or Janet. We have someone else who live streams on Friday. Sometimes it's Janet, sometimes it's someone else, and they're usually around someone else who works here, obviously. Thank you, Emma. And the live streams on Fridays are more centered around health promotion topics and areas of health and well-being, whereas I tend to live stream on issues to do with your mental health and your mental well-being, and everything encompassing that. So on that note, if anyone ever has any ideas that you would like me to investigate and then talk about to do with psychology, mental health, those kinds of things, your emotions, your behaviours, all those things, by all means let us know. So today I'm live streaming on a bit of a different topic. Just going to move my mic here, that I used to be quite involved in, and it occurred to me that I think it's still worthwhile to talk about a topic such as when a loved one goes to prison, because you don't hear much about that out in the world. The only way you would hear about that is if that experience has happened to you and you're involved in that prison scene or the justice system, or the criminal justice system, of course. And it's an isolating, lonely, overwhelming place to be. So I'm not focusing on the prisoners themselves today. I might talk about that, but really, I really wanted to talk more about today being the partner or the child or the parent or the friend or the sibling or whatever of somebody who has gone to prison, and what that is like for you and how you cope with that, and how you get out the other side. And there are many, many different facets to that experience of having someone you love go to prison. First and foremost, of course, it can be very shocking. It can be really quite traumatic, particularly if you've never known anyone to go to prison before, or you've never had a speeding ticket, you've never been involved in anything like that before, and suddenly someone you know and love, or who's very close to you, is arrested and ends up in prison. There's many steps along the way, to a period of imprisonment, starting from, there might be a police investigation or a sudden arrest, and then there can be this weird period of time between court, and they might be out in the community, bailed out to the community, or they could be being held between when they're arrested and when they've gone to court, and they might be incarcerated during that time. It just depends on the crime. It depends on many factors, and I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really comment on that. But I do know it depends on, the type of crime, things like your flight risk, if there's been other criminal activities or previous periods of incarceration, how full the prisons and stuff like that, as to whether they're sort of bailed in the community or held inside whilst they're waiting for their time in court. Both of those periods of time present different challenges and different levels of kind of shock, really. Having someone you know and love be arrested can be really, like I said, shocking, can be very traumatic, can be really confusing, particularly if you haven't known what was going on, and suddenly you get a call to say they've been taken away, or you might have witnessed that yourself. You might have had the experience of the police come to your house to arrest the person that you're with, or the person that you know, or the person that you live with. You might have had the police come to your house and do a search and execute a search warrant. Both of those situations are very overwhelming and can be scary, confusing. You don't know what your rights are, you don't know what's happening. All you know is that there's something major happening and you don't have any control over it. And you're scared. It can be a really terrifying time. If children, are home at the time and they witness, say, a parent being arrested, understandably that can be very upsetting and potentially traumatizing for them as well, particularly if that parent is then taken away by the police and they don't get to see them or hear them and they're like, what's going on? I want to talk about that a little bit later in this live stream, because children need, perhaps more support than the adults to a degree. And a lot of people get a bit confused. Well, how do I talk to children about, their parent being in prison, or, someone really close to them going into prison, and what do they tell them the truth? Do they not? All those kinds of things. So I want to talk a little bit about that in a bit, but I'm also going to cover many other different things in the meantime. I'm just looking at some stuff. Primarily when somebody goes to prison, it's an experience of loss. And it's a funny kind of loss. Not funny, ha-ha, far from that usually. There is a term for this called an ambiguous loss. So that's related to grief. So when somebody goes to prison and you lose them to prison, you experience a lot of overwhelming, sometimes grief. And grief that can be really confusing, because this is why we call it an ambiguous loss. It's not a clean-cut loss. Someone hasn't died, although it may feel like someone has died. We know where they are and we know what's happened. They're just no longer physically with us. So it puts us in this grey zone of grief, which can be very difficult to navigate, because you're in this limbo state, as they probably are too. They're going through their own experience as they enter into the prison system. For those on the outside, though, the experience of grief and loss can be quite profound. And like I said, an ambiguous loss, you're dealing with nothing that's clean cut. And there might still be many questions and many unknowns, if they're waiting sentencing, or if they're waiting court date, or if they get sentenced and then they're moved to prison, or if they appeal and then what's happening with that, and they might get moved again. And all of these things are happening and you have no idea what's happening a lot of the time. You have no control over that. You're very, very at the mercy of this huge system that is overwhelming, that is quite frightening. It's designed to be that way, really, because prisons are there to deter people from committing crimes. And prisons are there to put people away who are perhaps very unsafe for society. In our system here in Western Australia, we have the Department of Corrective Services. So that name, with corrective services, the idea being to correct people's behaviour when they go to prison. And that's a whole other kettle of fish that I won't go down that path today as to whether prison is effective or not in changing people's behaviours. I want to talk, as you know, more about the experience for the family members or the loved ones of that prisoner, because they do time as well. When somebody goes to prison, all of their surrounding family and friends, co-workers, children, all that, are kind of in there with them, and they go through their own period of imprisonment as well. They're doing time. Families do time with that person that they love, that is actually doing the time. And when you're on the outside, depending on who you are in relation to that person who's gone to prison, your time can be tough, or it can be, it's not that bad. Not as bad as being in prison. I want to get back though to ambiguous loss and what that is. When somebody, so I'm going to give you some examples. So say somebody develops a mental illness, a severe mental illness, and you still have that person in front of you, but you've kind of lost them. You've lost them to an illness. The same with dementia or Alzheimer's or a chronic, disabling, progressively worse disease. You still have that person physically, they're still there, or you know where they are. They might be in hospital or prison, but they're not there. You might have lost them mentally to the mental illness, or you might have lost their personality to dementia, or you've kind of lost them to going to prison, for example. And it can happen in reverse. So ambiguous loss can occur too, say when somebody goes missing and sort of psychologically, physically you don't know where they are. Obviously that would be a horrific situation. But you don't know where they are, but they're still kind of alive in your mind. Whereas when somebody goes to prison, you know where they are, but they're not with you, and you can't have the same sort of connection. So ambiguous loss can show up in many different ways. When the loss is not clean cut, they haven't died, they haven't moved away, moved away by choice. Like a relationship breakup, done, clear cut most of the time, but we all know relationship breakups are rarely like that. Being in an experience like ambiguous loss, particularly the loss of someone to prison, can be really difficult because the grief is mixed up with feelings, say, of shame, of fear, of anxiety, of confusion, of shock. What we call that is disenfranchised grief. So that is a grief that is, again, not very clean cut and is kind of tainted with these other feelings, particularly of shame. So, and that you can't just, it's very hard to go out into the world and somebody says, how are you going? And you're like, I'm really terrible, I'm really sad, I'm really grieving the loss of my partner. And they go, oh, where's your partner? And you're like, they're in prison. And most people are like, oh, and they have a lot of thoughts and a lot of judgments about that. And, that makes sense. Like I said, prison is designed to be a scary place. So you can't just share your grief as openly as you might otherwise would when you're grieving, say, the loss of a pet or the loss of a partner or any other significant loss. There's many, many different ways that we lose things every day sometimes. So we have this disenfranchised experience of grief that we have to hide it in a way. If you're going through something like that, if you have a lot of shame about what your loved one has done, if they've been put in prison for crimes which most people would find pretty terrible and pretty abhorrent, then it's very hard to grieve openly and grieve in a way that is kind of accepted by society. Nobody wants to think about prisoners. Nobody really wants to think about their family members. Why do we do that? They're wrong, they're bad, And that's another thing. Sometimes you can get tainted with whatever the prisoner did, whatever crimes they committed. Sometimes there's this kind of, by association, you must be a bad person, or what happened that you're with them, or your child is like that, or your parent is like that, quite complex situation. And it can be really, really problematic when we start to label people, but because of their association with, say, a family member. You can't control who your family is. You're just born into that family. You can't control what behaviours go on there. They're just doing what they're doing and they've done the wrong thing, kind of thing. So when you have an experience of a loved one going to prison, you enter into this really grey space. It's already grey. Like I said, it's already confusing because you're in a huge system. If you're in a major capital city, whether that's in Australia or throughout the world, there's probably a few prisons, and the system that they're within is huge and overwhelming. You physically go to a prison and it can be, especially the first time, really overwhelming. It looks like a prison. There's big walls, there is probably barbed wire, there are guards, there are sniffer dogs, there are very, very strict rules about when you can visit, when you can talk to them on the phone. The loss of control you experience in relation to the contact with that person is pretty big. You can't just pick up the phone, hey, how you going? You can't send text messages. The only way you can communicate is to wait by the phone for them to ring you, and they might be able to ring you every day. If they're on remand, in custody on remand, waiting sentencing or waiting court date, certainly here in Western Australia, I don't know enough about the eastern states prison systems over there. I imagine it would be quite similar. No idea about it internationally. But when somebody's held in custody, remanded in custody, because they haven't been sentenced, they have some more freedoms inside. So typically they are able to call whoever they want a lot more frequently than once they've been sentenced, and depending on the kind of security level they've given, if they're sort of low risk, medium, high, depending on the crime they've committed and the sentence they've been given, then the restrictions really tighten up. So, you know, that your loved one might have been able to call you every day, a couple of times a day, depending too if they have money, you know. It's a whole other kettle of fish I'll talk about in a little bit. I feel like I'm saying that a lot. A whole other kettle of fish. There's lots of kettles. There's lots of fish when we're talking about this topic. So yes, contact is severely cut, and you lose that control to be able to contact someone. You have to wait for them to call you, you know, and like I said, there might be every day, it might be once a week. Do they have money? Can they get to the phone? Are the phones all, you know, is everyone on the phone already? Typically you have to register with the prison. They have to know who you are. You've kind of got to get through security. Same when you visit a prison. And visiting a prison for the first time can be pretty out there, I won't lie. It can be really full on. And typically you would have, like I said, had to register who's visiting. You know, if you're bringing any other people with you, you have to book in for that visit, and sometimes you have to book weeks ahead depending on how many people are going. During the pandemic, certainly here in Western Australia, visits were cut, so there were no visits to prisons whatsoever. Fortunately, the department was able to allow Skype visits, so to speak, which was really good. You know, I think that's still allowing some contact, which is helpful for the family members and the prisoners themselves, because they need to be able to cope and still feel connected. Otherwise, they're going to come out in a worse, feeling worse, perhaps. So, say you go to a prison for the first time and you've had to register your details, and whoever else is coming with you, you've had to book time, you've had to wait on that phone for 20 minutes. I need to be told, no, it's fully booked, you've got to come next weekend. Typically prisons are out of the metro area, so you've got to drive a fair way. Do you have a car? If not, how are you going to get there? If you have a car, you know, do you know where to go? Do you have enough petrol? All these things. And then you rock up and you've got to, you know, register yourself at the building. You've got to lock all your valuables away. Typically, the higher the security of the prison, the more you're kind of stripped of your, I don't know, like individuality. You've got to take off usually a lot of your jewelry. If you're wearing jewelry, you know, you can't wear certain things inside. Obviously, you can't take your handbag or drugs or any crazy thing. You can't take anything. You just take yourself. And whoever else you're with, kind of thing, if you're going with other people. Then there's security checks to get through. You know, there's metal detectors, there's sniffer dogs for drugs, there's always someone getting kicked out at that time, there's always a lot of emotion. Typically people are really kind of keen to get in, and I want my full hour or my full 2-hour visit, so it's just hurry up kind of thing. You can't control that. The prison officers might be having a difficult day, there might be a lot of numbers, somebody might have already got busted for something, and suddenly you're waiting in line for 20 minutes, you know, it's not fun. And all the time sometimes your anxiety is rising, which got me thinking then about anxiety. And when somebody you love goes to prison, and if they haven't gone before, or you don't know anyone who's gone to prison before, this is very true for children too, whose parents go into prison. Their anxiety and their fear about what is happening to that loved one or their parent can be very overwhelming. As I said, prisons are designed to be scary places. So imagine what that's like for a child to think, my mum has gone to prison, my dad has gone to prison. Are they going to get harmed? Are they sitting in a cell all day and all night? Can they sleep? What are they eating? You know, it can be really, really scary because you don't know what's happening to them. And there's so many unknowns and so many of this fear that hovers around, you know, until you're able to kind of establish contact, communicate with them, reassure them, you know, you get some reassurance from them. And that can be really, really big and frightening for children to think, oh, mummy's in a prison, She's locked away, is she safe? She's not safe. Why can't I talk to her? Why can't I see her? Why can't she come and see me at school? All these perfectly normal questions, which for a little child or a bigger child can be really, really confusing as to why, and very, very upsetting as to why their parent isn't there anymore. I've kind of gone off track a bit. But going back to, say, visiting a prison for the first time, I guess I just wanted to acknowledge and warn anyone who's going for the first time that it can be really overwhelming, and it's a great idea if you have people around you who can support you with that. I'm not saying they have to go in with you. That might be a bit complicated, but someone who's willing to say, wait while you're visiting, or who's going to be around for you to have a drink or have a cuppa with you or a bit of a cry with you when you get home. And that who your friends are, and that will show up at that time, particularly because it's to do with prison and crimes and someone's committed an offence. Obviously, many people find that really, really difficult. And sometimes people don't want anything to do with you anymore, or anything to do with your loved one who's gone to prison. And that can be obviously a whole other level of things to deal with there, because suddenly people are laying judgments on you, judgments on them. You're trying to hold all that stuff, and without adequate support for yourself, you're probably going to drown. And like I said, families of prisoners, typically, the closer the people are to that prisoner, the more time they serve as well. So what do I mean by that? So if the person who's gone to prison is your partner, you were dependent on them, and they were the breadwinner, or a significant part of your life and your relationship. You may have had children together, and they go inside. Suddenly you have lost not just a partner, but perhaps your source of income, the other person who was supporting you in parenting. You've lost that relationship. And when, depending on the length of time they're inside, that can be a whole other thing to deal with as well. Because if they're gone, for a few weeks or months, obviously that's very, very difficult. I'm not discounting that. But the longer they're away for, the longer that's going to affect your relationship with that person, for you and for the family members around them. And if you stay with that person, or if it's your child who's in prison, if I'm talking about adult prisoners here, not really talking about juvenile, that's different kettle of fish. The more your relationship is going to be affected by the length of time that they're inside. And sometimes you have to make decisions along the way whether you want to continue to be in a relationship with that person or not. Or, if so, how do we navigate this? How do we still stay close, given that we can't see each other all of the time? There is heavy controls over how we communicate, when we communicate, why we communicate. Typically, all phone calls are monitored in prisons as well. I think you can still send letters and stuff like that. I think in some countries in the world, you are able to email a prisoner. I think in the UK they have that system. Not sure about America or New Zealand for that matter. Everything changes. Everything changes. How could it not? And so there you are, doing time along with the person, but you're on the outside, and they don't have to worry anymore about a roof over their head, or income, or food, or many, many other things. That gets taken care of, as it should. That's a human right. Everyone has the right to shelter, to water, and to food, and if they're in prison, they do need access to supports and things that are going to help them reduce the chances of reoffending when they get out. The flip side, though, is the people on the outside who might not have any of that anymore. They have to take care of themselves in a really different way without this, say, significant person in their life who was a big part of their life, whether that's your partner or your adult child or a really good friend or a work colleague. And often when somebody is arrested, or if they get remanded in custody, it's like, boom, everything stops. So there's no time to wrap things up. There's no time to organise, like when somebody dies, if it's a sudden death, all this stuff is kind of left hanging, whether that's work stuff or family stuff or think dynamics within families or friendships that need to be sorted out. There's been no opportunity to come to terms with what's about to happen. That the only time that's different, obviously, if somebody is arrested and bailed to the community before they have their time in court or are sentenced, then there is this period of time where you all can come to terms with the fact that that person is most likely going to prison. Do they need to tidy up their affairs? What do they need to put on hold? What do we need to organise and do? What are we going to tell everyone? How are we going to get through this, as a family? So there's so many different factors that come up. I'm laughing, but it's not funny at all. You kind of have to laugh at the craziness of some of this stuff, though, because if you don't, it probably won't be good. So there are so many different, there's not really a one size. There's kind of standard, I guess, things. Somebody gets arrested and they're in the community, or somebody gets arrested and they go inside, or, then you've got the parole on the other side of that, or when they come out. Oh, that's a whole different kettle of fish. I keep saying that. I guess the key thing throughout all of this, you might be really, really worried about that person in prison. Of course you are, and you probably need to be until you're able to see that they're okay, they're safe enough, their needs are being taken care of. They might have a job in there, they might be studying, they might be doing some therapy, things like that. You need to take care of yourself, though. Really, really, really important. And look, I say that probably in every live stream that I do, the importance of self-care. And I know that it can sound so cliched and so ridiculous, and it just isn't. It just isn't. Your life is the most important. And yet, even if you have children, you need to be able to function, and function pretty well. You need to be good enough, as we say. Otherwise, you won't be able to care for the people around you, okay? So you won't be able to look after your children that well. You won't be able to support that person who's in prison. Because let me tell you, they're probably really struggling trying to support you. Maybe they really want to still be helping and they can't. And they're powerless, very, very, very powerless. And this whole situation is a very powerless situation. So in a way, you need to find what power you still have when the rug's been pulled out from under you. And on that notion too, if your loved one has committed a crime which is very offensive to most people and is a crime for a reason, that can be tremendously shocking to discover parts of a person perhaps that you thought you knew or you didn't want to know, and suddenly it's out in the open. Even worse, potentially, if it's in the media. Obviously a lot of criminal cases and people getting arrested and stuff like that end up in the media. It is great news fodder kind of thing. And sometimes, it's important, it's in the public domain. For the family members, boy, do I feel sorry for them, because they're all getting dragged through the media circus, particularly if there's a long drawn out court case, or it's a very high profile court case, or the crime is particularly horrific or horrendous in some way, and everyone's kind of watching that person, who's being charged and being questioned, all this kind of in court, that kind of thing. But the family members, what is happening to them? How are they sleeping at night? What are they thinking? Are they having to rejig the whole way of thinking about that person? Sometimes they've got to come to a whole new place of understanding. And what does that mean? What does that mean for my relationship with this person? What does that mean with who I thought they were? Well, if they're like this, what does it mean for the entire time I've known that person? Really big questions that come up. Really big, as well as the sort of the daily stress, say if you're going through court or it's in the media, or if you're awaiting sentencing and everyone's just kind of hovering in this no man's land of uncertainties and unknowns and fears and anxieties and what ifs, and can get really, really big, really, really big. Hence, you so need to take care of yourself. So you find yourself a support network of people who still love you, who do not judge you for who you're associated with, go to counselling. If you need counselling, go to counselling. You are welcome to come here for some counselling, or find someone else. Go to your GP. You know, if your children are struggling, if it's the children's parent that has gone inside, I strongly suggest you get some play therapy or some other types of counselling for the children to be able to, what we would call, process and work through what has happened to their parent, and their little fears and anxieties, or big fears and anxieties about where mummy or daddy is. With children, it's up to you whether you tell the school, if the children are school age, primary school or high school or daycare or whatever. If your child is noticeably struggling emotionally, or starting to act up in school, or be disengaged from school, or withdrawn, or any behaviours that are out of the norm, it's probably better that you think about telling the teacher or the school. And that, I'm just saying that with hesitation, because I think that's a very personal choice. Because sometimes there can be some anxiety around, is my child going to get labelled and judged? That's the child with the parent in prison. In some schools, in some areas, there might be a few families with loved ones in prison. In some areas, other areas, in some other schools, there may be no one. And there may be some kind of uncertainty. What do I tell the school? Do I need to tell the school? Who do I tell? Who's important here? And think about that. Who do I tell? Why do they need to know? Who is it going to help? Can I trust them? Let alone the children. So with children, again, I do advise you come to counselling with them. I'm of the opinion it's generally better to be honest with children in a similar but different way, that broaching subjects with children that are typically taboo or very difficult. So I'm talking to kids about sex, talking to kids about drugs, talking to kids about crime, you know, rights and wrongs. And we spend, as a society, we spend a lot of time raising our children in schools and in the family home usually, teaching children about what's right and wrong, because we all need to know that. That's part of socialization. That's part of growing up. We need to know the rules. We need rules in our society to function, to feel safe, to protect ourselves, kind of from each other sometimes. And children grow up believing that prison is a bad place. It's a scary place. Bad people go there. Evil people, wrong people. What happens when that bad person is my mum or my dad? What is that like for that little person? What are they telling their friends? Are they telling anything to their friends? Do you tell the parents of your child's friends? You know, let alone the school. But getting back to that child themselves, when we talk to children about really difficult situations or topics, like I said, sex, drugs, imprisonment, we need to be mindful of what is age appropriate. Okay, so 3-year-old is obviously going to have a different understanding than a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, or a 15-year-old. If your child has witnessed that parent being taken away or arrested by the police, you do need to have some sort of conversation with them about what has happened. You don't have to complicate it. You know, you need to try and keep it pretty simple. If you need help with having that conversation with that child, but by all means get that help. Talk to someone. Contact a local service or Google stuff online. There is a lot of stuff online. Here in Western Australia, we have a service called Outcare that help prisoners and families of prisoners in Victoria, based in Melbourne in Victoria. There's an organisation called VACRO, which are very good, which do a similar role here. There's one in New South Wales. There's probably quite a few around, but they have some really good resources and people to talk to about all these things. What do I tell the children? What do I tell my parents? What do I tell friends? You know, kind of thing. It is up to you at the end of the day, but it also is what it is. You cannot deny that someone has gone to prison. There's only so long you can kind of lie about that, really, if you want to. And I'm not saying that's the right thing or the wrong thing to do. You need to make a judgment call for yourself. Obviously, if you tell your children, they're going to have more questions and perhaps more feelings, and you need to feel able enough to support them through that. Hence, I talk a lot about the importance of getting your own support first before you can really, help the children more. Validate. So what do I mean by that? So if your children have witnessed their parent being taken away and they're very distressed, stay with them in that distress, acknowledge that for them, be there with them, as distressing and as upsetting as that may be for you as well, because you're probably going through your own things as well. If the child says, why have the police taken my parent away? They want to talk to you, mum, about some things that have occurred, you're probably gonna have to say something around your parent, mum or dad has done some things that aren't right, and then you will probably have to have a whole discussion around right, they're probably fully aware of what's right and wrong and stuff like that, again, depending on the age. But you're having to help the child separate out the person from their behaviours, essentially. Typically, children hold a positive view of their parent in their mind up until a certain age. They really, they still love their parent, idolise their parent. And the older they get, the more they start to see them as humans, and they're perhaps not all perfect. I don't want to listen to my parent all the time. It's normal if your child really freaks out and is very, very angry at that parent. They have a right to be, and that is their feeling. You cannot deny how they're feeling. You would ideally support them and talk with them through that, or get some wider support with them. Look out for behaviours of stress, or aggression. So not sleeping, tantrums, might be going back to bedwetting, might need to sleep with the other parent at night or not be able to sleep alone, might really start struggling at school, might not be concentrating, might be truanting, engaging in some really unhelpful behaviours. And all that is saying that children communicate through their behaviours. So the more kind of wild their behaviours are, the louder they are screaming, essentially. The same for us as adults, we all have our funky ways of coping and not coping kind of thing. So again, like I was saying, it's kind of up to you what you tell the school. It can be quite worthwhile telling certain members of the school. Of course, you can't control who else is going to know about that, but in terms of just supporting that child so that the teacher is aware something major is happening at home for this child. So I just need to keep a lookout, if they're not concentrating in class, or there's something really upset, or they start fighting in the playground or sitting in the corner and not wanting to talk with anyone, it can be obviously really useful for the teacher or the school to know what's happening for that child, and for you as the family member, and then have a conversation around, well, what's that going to look like? How are we going to best support the child and the family? And hopefully your school is really awesome and on board and is not going to judge you or judge the child for what someone in their family has done. The older the child, the more likely it is that they know what's happened anyway. They might have witnessed it. They might have seen it in the news. Another kid might have said, "Oh, I know where your dad is. I saw it on Facebook or something. I don't know, kind of thing." If you deny what's happened, I guess if they're very, very young children, babies and toddlers, probably could get away with not telling them if you want to. I would just invite you to think about why you want to avoid going there with them. Is that about, I'm going to be confronting you, is that about your own denial and your own struggle with coming to terms with what is happening to you, kind of thing? If so, hey, that's okay. Totally get that. And maybe, again, think about how you can better support yourself in that, so you can deal with your new reality as best you can, because this is a whole new reality, and a whole new reality for everyone who surrounds that person who's now gone to prison. So going back to children, the older the children are, typically they do know what's happened, or they will want to know. It's never advisable to lie to children, really, but you might want to think about what you're going to say, how much you're going to tell them, because a 10-year-old is not going to cope with some pretty confronting information as well as perhaps an older child. Although that does depend on the child and the maturity level of that child and what they kind of know already. Maybe they know that their parent or their uncle has to regularly go to the police to check in with things, so they know that their family member is probably doing something that is wrong or illegal or naughty or however you want to say that. Again, you're going to have to really help the child sort out in their head that their parent essentially from their behaviour, and whether they can kind of reconcile that or not. And it may well happen that child does not want to see that parent anymore, is really, really angry or really, really distressed about what's happened and don't want to talk to them on the phone or don't want to go and visit them. And I'm of the view that you need to respect that for that child, and you need to support that child or that teenager through that experience, so that they're not just a bundle of reaction and a bundle of trauma and a bundle of loss and a bundle of confusion, and you're sending them off to school every day and expecting or hoping things are just going to continue on as normal. It will take you a while to find you a new normal. It will take the family a while to adjust, particularly if, pretty much everywhere in the world there's more men in prison, so we could theorise that there's probably more partners and fathers in prison than male partners, I should say, in heterosexual couples, than mothers in prison. Where was I going with that? Yeah, so they have to kind of come up with a new picture in their head, really, a new version of their dad, say, or of their mum, of the parent who has committed a crime. And what does that mean when I thought this person was amazing and good? And they may still be amazing and good. They have just done the wrong thing. And really now is the time for consequence. So there can be a conversation had around, well, this is the consequence of what has happened. Or, if you... Of course, I'm talking here, about a situation where you're like, yeah, they're in prison and we have to deal with it. It can be quite different if you strongly disagree with your loved one going to prison. And you're like, they've been wrongly arrested and they shouldn't be charged and we're fighting this. You're going to have a really different attitude to what is happening and probably be saying some very different things to, say, children and family members around you, because you're going to be like, no, we're going to fight this and this is wrong, So something else to think about then. All I'm encouraging anyone who's watching this to do, who has children, is to be very supportive of the children and their needs, to really watch them closely, to talk with them, to allow them space to express things, to feel what they feel, to verbalize, to stomp around, to be confused, to be ashamed. And that can be very confronting and hard for you as the parent or the loved one or grandparent or auntie or uncle, because you're going to have your own feelings around that as well. And hence, I keep going on about, you need to take care of yourself and you need to support yourself through that as well, so that you're able to support the people who are dependent on you. I wanted to talk a little bit about shame and feelings of shame, which can be really strong when somebody close to you goes to prison. And again, you might worry that people are going to label you or judge you for what that person has done. And if their crime has been, like I said, pretty horrific, very violent, or crimes against certain populations in the public, which most people would agree is very, very wrong, it can really fill you with a sense of shame and struggle, guilt, maybe even guilt, maybe perhaps you have a lot of guilt for what has happened and that you didn't see it or that you didn't stop it, all these kinds of things. Really, really, really difficult stuff to deal with. And hence I keep going back to finding safe people in your life that you can talk to about all this stuff, that you can feel these things with, that are willing to be with you, literally be with you in those feelings, who are not going to judge you or not going to shame you even more, or not going to say you just need to leave them, just cut them out of your life. What if you don't want to do that? That's your choice stick around or to do whatever you want to do. Shame can be a killer. It can be such a devastating feeling. It's kind of an excruciating feeling where you want to hide away. And maybe there is a lot of that in the sort of the early days when somebody goes to prison. You don't want to go and see people. You don't want to be seen out in public. You just want to kind of deny to yourself what's happening. And if you've got to do that for a little bit to get through the day, do that, but try not to live in that space. And if you find yourself just being eaten alive by, denial or shame or the grief and loss that is coming along with everything, particularly if they get sentenced and the sentence is years long, that can just be mind shattering in a way, and then you start to deal with the loss of the future that you thought you had with this person, whether it is a partner or your adult child or a family member, all the plans that you might have had with that person. Or if they're a parent, you can start thinking they're going to miss out on all this time with our child. What does that mean? They're an absent parent. And if you are a parent and the other parent has gone to prison, you instantly become a single parent without choice. Bam. Similar to a death, but not, obviously. This is going to sound horrible, but with the death, there's a lot of sympathy. Of course there is. When you lose someone to prison and that kind of death, there's usually a lot less sympathy, a lot less empathy. But you're a single parent in the same way, because you don't have physical support from that parent, you don't have financial support from the parent, and in fact you have more to do, because now you're raising that child on your own. If you want them to visit, still be part of that parent's life, you've got to take them to visits and then figure out how you're going to do that. And you might have less money to do that and less kind of energy because now you're doing everything on your own. So it's really big, and it's not really talked about or thought about much unless you're already involved in that sort of scene, unfortunately. And again, these things happen without your saying it, kind of thing. You didn't know what was happening, and suddenly things are blowing up in your face. This is life, unfortunately. None of us sign up for experiences like this. Why would we? Kind of thing. We can't help who we love. We can't help who our family members are. We can't help what they choose to do and the choices they make. What we can help is us ourselves, and if you have dependent children on you, you can help them as well. You can help all of you get through it as best you can. And like I said, I really encourage you to reach out and find, and particularly now online, there are a lot of really great online support services. I think there are forums and online groups. I used to run one a long time ago now, where people can chat about their experience. You might find it really helpful to be anonymous in some of these discussions. If you do go online and find some support services, if you feel particularly ashamed about the crimes that your loved one has committed, you have a right, of course, to be anonymous and just to use your first name or a different name. But I think it's really important to find other people who are going through similar experiences so you don't feel so alone. That is such a big thing. That's such a crappy thing, but often here when we run groups, we run group programs here at Women's Health and Wellbeing Services, as well as individual counselling. And the feedback we get repeatedly over and over again, and we always will get this feedback, is when somebody comes into a group, and they might have come into a group about anxiety or self-compassion or postnatal depression. And whilst the topic and the content is really important and you're learning stuff and you're learning new ways to deal with things, what is more important is the shared experience among that group, so that everyone in that group knows what it's like to have, say, anxiety, or knows what it's like to have postnatal depression, or knows what it's like to struggle with a mental illness. That is so powerful and so healing. So I really encourage you, whether that's in person or online, to find other people who have loved ones in prison that you could just talk to, and you can go, today was a really difficult day, or today this is happening, or today we're waiting to hear back about the appeal, or I don't know what I'm doing in this relationship anymore, or I don't know how they can parent from the inside, kind of thing. All those things, any and all of those things, it's just so important to find other people who are going through similar experience as you, so that you can support each other. You totally get what it's like. You can then support other people as they get dragged into that situation. It's kind of like a club that nobody wants to be a member of. And suddenly you don't have a choice and you're a member of this club and you're like, oh shit, that sucks, kind of thing. The best way to deal with it is to deal with it. The more you don't, or the more you want to run away and hide, honestly, you're just going to prolong your suffering and make it a lot harder for yourself. Hence the need to look after yourself, to be gentle and kind with yourself as you walk through this journey. If you choose to stay close to that loved one, you're going to have to make some choices along the way as well, and then support, say, your dependents through that. Do they want to visit that parent? Are you willing to take them there? All these kinds of different things. So many things to think about. It can be very complex and it can be quite confusing and overwhelming, as I've said, I think, multiple times now. So the more information you can get, the more support you can get from the right people, the better it is, and the better you will be able to survive this period of incarceration, because like I said, families do time, and sometimes they do harder time than the actual prisoner themselves. I know some people might disagree, but that is my personal opinion, and I've witnessed that myself, so it can be really tough. I think I'm going to wrap up there. I've been talking for nearly an hour again. If you have anything to say about this, by all means drop a comment. There hasn't been really any comments except for lovely Emma just acknowledging that the mic is on. Always good to know that the mic is on during a live stream. I might put some resources up on our website, Women's Health and Wellbeing Services, which is whws.org.au, and some links to some good websites that support families and loved ones of prisoners. There's some stuff in Perth, but also over east and internationally. If you have any questions about today's topic, by all means drop us a line, visit our website. You can email us info@whws.org.au, or you can message through Facebook. You can watch this back on Facebook anytime, or you can call us 9490-2258, remembering that we are in Perth, Western Australia. Next week, I'm live streaming on I don't know what just yet. So if anyone has any suggestions, I will definitely come up with them. Do not worry, I always have lots of ideas in my head. Just haven't kind of formulated that yet. But like I said right at the beginning, honestly, if you have any topics related to psychology, mental health, even sexology, I'm nearly a qualified sexologist, sort of qualified, nearly trained. So anything to do with that as well, I'm more than happy to talk about any of those topics. But thank you so much for watching and listening to me talk on this kind of a tricky subject, but I think it's a really important subject to talk about, because we still have lots of prisons, we have lots of prisoners, and we have lots of families going through that prison experience as well. And the more we're able to support each other, the better we'll be able to cope with that, and hopefully in the end, reduce the rates of imprisonment, full stop kind of thing. All the best. Have a good week, and hopefully I'll see you next week. Bye.